This is Tara Graham reporting for the Real News Network in Baltimore City, Maryland. After the death of Freddie Gray in police custody in 2015, the city sheriff's office played a small but controversial role into the investigation, which led to the indictment of 6 officers. To avoid what was revealed later to be a police department hostile to charging one of their own, Baltimore State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby used sheriff's deputies to assist her office in swearing out arrest warrants against these officers, who were later cleared of all charges. But that is the most public move by this law enforcement agency, which has otherwise been out of the spotlight. And now a candidate for the agency's top job says he wants to change that. Former Baltimore Homicide Chief Stanley Brandford has recently filed to run for the job, and he says longtime incumbent John Anderson has been woefully absent from the city's crime fight. Brandford spent roughly 3 decades in the Baltimore City Police Department, including the last several years as Chief of Detectives and head of the city's Homicide Unit. In fact, it was Brandford who led Homicide during the investigation of the death of Detective Sean Souter. Detective Souter was shot in the head with his own gun a day before he was set to testify before a grand jury about his role in the 2010 case involving members of the now notorious Gun Trace Task Force, an incident that remains both controversial and unsolved. Brandford says he is running to transform the agency, including implementing progressive policies that would loosen the grip of law enforcement in areas like child support collections and evictions. To get a sense about what a new sheriff could bring to the table with regards to police accountability, crime fighting, and what he has to say publicly about the death of Souter, our reporter Stephen Janis sat down with Brandford for an interview, an opportunity we extended to his opponent.
Well, in my opinion, and it should be the opinion of every citizen in Baltimore, the sheriff has been absent. He's an absentee sheriff. I haven't seen him in the community. There is no connection to the community. The mayor has a VRI, which is a violent reduction strategy. She put that in place last year. And last year, every city agency was to be at that particular meeting and get involved to figure out what they can do to help make Baltimore safe. The city sheriff office have not been. The sheriff has not been. That's not an indictment on the actual deputies. That's an indictment on the leadership of the sheriff office. So absolutely, they have not been engaged and have not made a commitment to help our communities. The sheriff office, for the most part, has been in that civil citation or that civil enforcement role. And I think the sheriff office can grow and be much bigger than that and have more involvement than something like that. So absolutely they should be doing a lot more.
Well, that's the question, like how would that work? Like what specifically, how would that work for you to get, because really most people don't even think about the sheriff's office being involved in crime fighting, whether that's right or wrong. What kind of things would you do to sort of either change that perception or to actually substantially, substantively bring the sheriff into the crime prevention or crime, fight for the city?
Well, absolutely. So the sheriff office is something constitutionally they can do. However, it would take an agreement. It would take relationships. I have that relationships already with other law enforcement agencies in the city. I make sure that those relationships are in place, that we're communicating. The biggest thing that should happen is that the sheriff should know what's going on in the city. The sheriff office don't get involved. We don't know on a day-to-day basis what the crime trends are. We don't know what neighborhoods are suffering certain types of crime. If you don't know those things, if you don't know what neighborhoods have been struck with violence, you have not taken interest in knowing what those things are. If you don't know what those things are, then how can you help out?
We've had a consent decree with the Baltimore City Police Department, Department of Justice report. If you become sheriff, how are you going to address sort of the general mistrust of law enforcement in Baltimore City? I mean, how do you mend those sort of broken relationship that some people talk about?
Well, absolutely. Like I said before, to be involved and understand what Baltimore is going through, where are the crime trends at, and just be able to connect with the community. The other thing that the sheriff department could do is make sure, not only on a crime fighting standpoint, but just on a standpoint of connecting with the community, offering programs, doing things progressively to make sure that we are involved with our communities. We have a lot of young men and women who have open child support warrants. Those small warrants affect our neighborhoods. I want to be able to bring those people out of the shadows, try to connect them back with their kids, get those services back to the parent that needs it. Now, We may not be able to make a family whole, but I want to do everything possible to try to make families functional again and be able to connect those people back. So here's how that works. If you have an open child support warrant, come into the courthouse and we will make those connections with the judges and make sure we have permission to do so, but I think it's something that's doable. If you make an agreement to start your child support payment, we'll hold that warrant in deferment. That way you can go start working, come out of the shadows, put that warrant on the shelf and connect back with your kid. I know downtown is a big transitional area for some of our students. I'll make sure that the courthouse is what I call a safe house. When I was growing up, there were certain places we could go to where we knew that these areas were safe. I want to make the courthouse a safe place for juveniles to come to if they're in crisis. There's two things that I think that absolutely we have problem with in our community. Well, small open warrants, such as child support and traffic warrants, the FTAs, things like that. And we need to do everything possible to make sure those things are taken care of. And I tell you what they do. You get a police officer to stop someone on the street and they have a small open warrant on them. That person's job is to try to get away as soon as possible. They don't want to talk to the officer. The officer recognizes that behavior and the officer want to keep them there as long as possible to figure out why this guy is acting this way. Oftentimes something happened, the person get hurt. More likely than not, it's always the person who have the warrant. You do the investigation and you realize he had a traffic warrant or he had a child support warrant, something that was completely unnecessary. However, it has a safety factor for our neighborhoods. And I think if we can find ways to be able to take care of some small warrants like that and offer alternative programs, I think it'd make our community safer.
Well, also, a big point of sort of conflict is evictions, because people, you have to execute evictions, and some people say the sheriff's department doesn't communicate well. Have you thought about evictions at all in terms of how to handle that in a way that's more humane, or a way that might work with the people so that less people are evicted, or that it's easier for the families, or have you thought about that?
Absolutely. So I would like to put some advocacy programs into the sheriff's office. Now, I may not be able to stop an eviction. My goal is to make sure when the sheriff's office go out that we give some dignity to people as it pertains to how they are evicted. Too often we see, and you've probably seen it before on these evictions, you got people property that's setting out. Oftentimes it gets stolen. What I want to be able to do is have a way for landlords and for tenants, if they having these conflicts, to be able to have some sort of wraparound services and see if we can probably head off some of these problems in the first place. Maybe we can connect with different agencies that will offer some sort of a storage program so people's stuff don't get set out. So you got to be able to work with people, and nothing hurts but a try. Now,
the police department had the gun trace task force scandal, and it's created a lot of problems. I mean, what went wrong with holding officers accountable, and how can you address that if you're a sheriff? Holding police officers accountable. What do you think went wrong?
Well, quite a few things. One, leadership. Leadership is responsible, and when you identify problems, those problems got to be dealt with almost immediately. You can't sit back and wait on things like that. I think when you do identify those problems, they get dealt with.
Now, sheriffs get overtime too. Are you going to watch overtime in your department? I mean, just because that's been a big problem in the police department, are you going to watch that?
Oh, absolutely. So I know there's problems. The city is under budget. There are methods that you can put in place to watch that. Certainly, we want to make sure that we engage with the community, but it shouldn't cost the community an enormous amount of money to do so. So we'll have budget restraints put in. We'll have someone specifically watching the budget. We'll spend overtime if necessary, but we won't be spending an enormous or unnecessary overtime and hold people accountable.
Okay, so yeah, so you pledge we won't have the same problems with the sheriff's department that we have with the police department in terms of overtime?
Absolutely not. You will not have the same problem as it pertains to fiscal responsibility in the sheriff's office.
So I just want to ask this question because other people are going to ask you this question. You have the Detective Souter case. Do you have anything you want to say about that in terms of what do you think happened to Detective Souter? Was he murdered? Was it suicide?
Well, I think that's something best answered by the BPD. Of course, I was part of that, but the official statement, as far as that investigation concerns, should be something that's best answered by Commissioner D'Souza.
Do you think the public deserves to know? I mean, they had a big, sort of funeral for him, and do you think the public eventually deserves to know what happened with that case? I'm not asking you what happened.
No.
No one knows, but do you think the public deserves to know?
Absolutely. The public deserves to know the truth, what happened in that case. Absolutely.
You know, one thing really interesting in the Freddie Gray case, the Sheriff's Department helped with the investigation. If Marilyn Mosby comes in and says, I have a really big police investigation, but I want an outside source, do you feel capable of doing that? Would you do that? And because of your ties to the Baltimore Police Department, can you do that?
Absolutely. So as sheriff, one of my goals is to make sure we have a good investigative unit. I have the expertise to do that, to set that up. I do know good investigators can be in charge of that. And I think we do need, for the city's sake, for the citizens' sake, that if we ever get in a situation like that, to make sure that we have the expertise we need in the sheriff's office to give the state's attorney an alternative to BPD if she does or he does not feel comfortable with that investigation. So absolutely, sheriff can play a role in that, and under my leadership, we definitely will be able to accomplish that and do a good job. So
you don't mind holding the police department accountable even though you have close ties to it?
Well, if I'm asked to do that, and if the procedures are followed, and if it came down to a public trust issue that is in the best interest of the public, of course there will be conversation probably with city council and conversation with the mayor. If it was deemed that in the best interest of the city, in the best interest of transparency, if the sheriff's office was asked to do that, absolutely. I just need to make sure that we have the proper investigators and the proper unit set up prior to make sure that's done. I don't think they're equipped to do that now. Obviously, they have not been when you look at the Freddie Gray case. They were not equipped to do that type of investigation. Death investigations are something that's very difficult to do, and I'll make sure the sheriff's office is prepared to do those type of investigations in the future.